Now,
Watch
got it.
I'm always careful about some, well, I'm not careful enough about what I put on record. When you press record, it's a dangerous thing. So last summer, we left off with, I don't even want to say intriguing. It's a subject. It's a subject matter that is very relevant today. Probably, and I don't want you to answer this, but if I asked you, everyone here knows someone or knows of someone who has, well, let's just call it taken the route of assisted dying because of the situation, a situation which we can't really truly understand ourselves unless we are in that position, in that circumstance. Nobody can make a decision or speak for someone else. So I never judge or first of all, let me explain a couple of things. When you imagine you go to a rabbi and you ask a rabbi a question. So a rabbi is someone who has studied elements, various elements of halacha through their studies. What are those elements? It could be as simple as basar b'chalav. You could earn an entire smicha, a yora smicha, based on dairy and meat. I'm not kidding. And that means that you have studied it so in depth and every single rule and every single halacha to the point of mixture, what happens. I mean, imagine one of the things that I've recently had to start learning again all over again was the issue of if you accidentally, and I don't even know how this would happen, okay, but here's the question is you accidentally took a piece of fatty roast beef that you had and you put it in a pan to put it into the oven and you put it on top of a lean piece of chicken breast, lean meat. What is required? What happens? Well, we know that if it's common sense, if something is fatty substances give off juices more than lean substances. Believe it or not, blood is considered by the poskim, by the rabbis, as being a non-fatty element. Blood is not fatty. So in other words, if you accidentally spilled blood on top of a kosher piece of meat and it was non-kosher blood, what would be required is you'd have to take what they call kedei netila. First of all, kedei netila means the size of a finger and you'd cut it off. So rabbis can earn a smicha based on just that kind of background and knowledge and knowing all the laws inside and out. Then there's other kinds of smicha. There's orachaim smicha. There's yadin. You want to be a judge. You want to be someone who is going to settle cases in monetary judgments and be on a beit din. It's a higher level of learning. But what we are talking about here, and we left off in assisted dying, was it was relating to rabbis who are poskim. To be a posek, you're not a rabbi with a regular, ordinary smicha that works in a shul. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't a posek out there that has a congregation. There are, but those are the few and far between rabbis. So when you encounter a posek and you ask a question and you don't like the answer, you can't, you're not even supposed to be a rabbi. You got to be careful what questions you ask. I have gone to a posek. Well, first of all, I've gone to a posek a million times because my last teacher last year, not this year is a whole different ball of wax, but last year, my teacher in medical ethics, who I'm teaching you a watered down version of what I learned, happens to be a posek. He's a posek. He is at that level of learning where people will go to him and ask him these kinds of questions on medical ethics. It's a whole different level. And what the poskim, what those rabbis at that level say is you don't hear them use the word assisted dying, because assisted dying is a fancy way of saying assisted suicide. But, we don't like the word suicide. I see head shaking when I say that word, but I have to say it because that's what I'm taught. That's the word we use. Why don't we like it? What's the difference? Suicide has a connotation attached to it. We're saddened by that word. We don't want to hear it. And the reason maybe that they use it is because they don't want us to be. There was a movie, I never watched it, but I know about it. I mean, maybe some of you know the movie, you can shout it out what it was, but there was a movie about how, it's like Guinea showing you live to be a certain age and then you should be taken out of the earth. You don't need to be here anymore. Who needs you? So whatever that age was, all I know is when I go to cemeteries, and people do die young, we know that. And some people die of old age, but some people die, unfortunately, at younger ages. That's because of illness. But what happens, you go back into the old cemeteries in Toronto, particularly Jewish cemeteries, and you look at monuments and you see that the average man lived, if you saw him on the monument, 57, 62, I'm 62. That was about it. That's what we got. Today, I'm seeing people live to be 100. That's why when the Queen, Oleha Shalom, used to give out those letters, certificates to people that live to be 100. That was like they stopped giving it out because they'd have to give it out every Montag and Donnerstag to a lot of people. Lots of people live to be 100. So in those days, when my father would tell me that somebody passed away, and I'd say, how old were they? I remember one particular person in particular who died. I think he was 80 something years old. And I said to him, oh my God, 80, like I was at my time, I was probably 15 or 14, and I said, 80 is like, it's so old. And my father said to me, tell that to a 79-year-old. So it becomes, if we're going to live to be 100, are we going to say it's enough? You've lived to be 100. You've had your time, goodbye. Well, you don't want to be told that if you're healthy and marching around at 99. And if I gave you a contract right now and said, you can live to be 120, would you sign the contract? Would you sign the deal? Some of you, yes. Some of you, maybe not. But who knows what's going to be? Maybe in the next generation, our grandchildren's generation, people will live to be 120, no problem. So where am I going with this? I'm going that we have to accept that concept. We don't have to accept anything, but I'm suggesting that we don't shy away from the term assisted suicide, because when it takes place and when it happens and when someone just makes that decision for themselves, it's not that they themselves are making a statement, I'm pretty sure, to say, I've had enough because of my age. They're not saying that. And we don't, the rabbis don't want you to do that. They don't want you to say, that when you live to be 60, it was already good. Now it's 80, so that should be good too. So when you get to be 80, we'll just pull the plug on you. No matter what you're doing, doesn't matter. You're healthy, too bad. We don't do that. We don't say, so you had enough, you're 90, you had enough, you're 110. We don't do that. They don't want us to do that. And they're very cautious about saying, it's enough. What right do we have to play God? That's the interesting concept. We're not God. Only God is supposed to decide. So where we left off was we started at the beginning of the medical ethics thing, discussing what was a goses. That was the term we used. A goses, meaning someone who is inevitably going to die. Well, I find that interesting because we're all inevitably going to die. What does that mean? Inevitably going to die. When you go through the poskim and then you see that they say, someone who has a terminal illness and they will never get better, they will never improve, they will only decline from that state. There is no hope of that person getting better. That is a person who is labeled a goses. But things are different today. Today, you could have a leukemia, a cancer, be treated, and go on to live for many, many, many decades. So does that mean that if you get a diagnosis and there's no chance of that it's ever going to go away, that you are a goses from that moment on? No, because back then when you had a terminal illness, back in those days, we didn't have the cures and the hopes and the clinical trials and the treatments and the everything, and the DNA and the genetics that we have, the ability to look into code and genetic code and to see how we can target a specific gene to give this person hope again, to give hope again. And that's changing every single day. So we will finish off with this topic. I was thinking today, but it might even be next week. But when we finish off with this, we're going to finish off by saying we will have to finish off by determining together what the actual definition of a goses really is. So there was the Perush Beit Lechem, Rabbi Yehuda Fatya, and he took an approach. So I'm getting to the nitty gritty here because we've talked for so many times. I always go around the bush, right? I always talk about, well, this one says this and this one says that, and then there's this lenient and this strict, and everybody goes, for God's sakes, Marshall, can't you just tell us what it is already? Like, are we allowed to? Are we not allowed to? Not really. But this is the approach that many of the mainstream poskim follow. They follow the concept that it's forbidden to push off the death of any patient, and you're not allowed to do anything to lengthen the life of the patient. All right, so if we are talking about someone who is about to die, that's who we're talking about. Someone who is about to die. The doctors say this person is about to die. If you are administering medicine, which is keeping that dying patient alive longer, why are we doing it? To prolong their suffering? Do we want to do that? No. So if you're administering medicine, I'm not saying that, well, perhaps you should not administer the medicine. I'm saying the contrary, you're not allowed to. The poskim themselves say, you see how they're taking already a bit of a lenient approach? They're not saying if the person is about to die and they need insulin, you're not allowed to give them the insulin. It's considered by most of the poskim to be the dumbest thing ever, because you have to step back. You have to let that person who is about to die in peace. Now, that doesn't mean that you take them in the gurney and you just start rolling them down the hall and give them a big ride so that they should die of shock because you killed them, because you're not allowed to move the patient. Remember we said that? You're not allowed to move them. You're not allowed to do things. You don't waltz into the room with the casket to show them what we're going to bury them in that same day. It's just not what we do. You don't administer. You don't say, hey, you know what? You're suffering. You're about to die. Let's give you another shot of insulin and make you suffer for another 12 hours. No, we let the person die. Of course, if there was some reasonable expectation, a hope that tomorrow there's going to be a cure and there's a course that could be successful, then you can put through the patient through all kinds of suffering, anything you want. You can torture them. You can give them 10 needles and give them an injection and give them a COVID shot and give them a flu shot and give them everything that is possible to give them, and every treatment available if there's a hope for a possibility of a cure. Then you're allowed to make the person suffer. And I mean it in a kind way. But in the case that's before us, the case that we talked about, that we left off with, what was that case? Does anybody remember? I'll tell you. We talked about the case of a person that was paralyzed, a young person paralyzed from top to bottom. They can't move. The parents would have to sit with them 24/7, 24/7, never leave their side. Someone would have to rotate 24/7 for years and years and years and years, possibly, to keep that person alive, because they can't even afford caregivers or nannies or help or doctors or nurses because they don't have the funds. You know, not everybody has hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank to spend on around-the-clock caregiving. We live in the top, I don't know, 10% of the world. We're living here in Canada with our food and shelters and nice, beautiful apartments and homes and comfortable beds and everything that we have. The whole world does not live like that. You know, you've traveled, you've seen, you know how some of the world lives. I mean, it sickens me. When I went on a cruise one time and I was in the, it stopped in the, they call it Labadee, I think it was called, or something. It's like a fancy beach resort in Haiti. In Haiti it was. And it stops, and I got off, and on one side of the thing where the ship was, they go, here's a big salad bar and all of this food, and everybody can fresh and eat and all of this. And on the other side of the fence, there were children that were hungry, looking through the fence, and they're not allowed to cross that line, not allowed to come and look at it. I don't like that. I don't like that the cruise ships come into places like that, and in front of people, they're doing that. It's another topic. It's for another discussion. But what I'm saying is that, by the way, to me, is a form of torture. It's awful. I think that's a terrible thing to do. Better, you should stay on your ship and eat. Get off, and you're taunting. I mean, we're talking about people that are starving in countries. We don't live in that world, but that doesn't mean that we're all rich. I mean, I don't have that kind of money in the bank to be able to pay that. So should the parents then say we are going to 24/7 for the next 20 years of our life? They're already, who knows what age, be looking after this person who will never get better, will never improve. Their quality of life is horrendous. They have to have bags changed every day. They can't use a bathroom. They're paralyzed. They could live for decades like this because they're young. And their mental capacity is not there either. So it's not like they're good and they're thinking and they're able to be there mentally and aware. Even that part of the brain is not even working and enabling. So we're talking about that kind of a case, that kind of a severe case. So when they go to the Rabbanim and they say, what do we do? Is it correct? Not asking permission. Is it correct? Is the right thing to do to say that this suffering patient, who even if you put on tubes down their throat to feed them, the person isn't aware enough, they'll be pulling the tubes out, they'll be yanking them out. So you'd have to sit there all the time making sure that this child is not pulling the tubes out. That kind of a case.
The tube out if they're paralyzed.
What did you say, Ruth? You broke up. I didn't hear you.
Oh, I said, how could they pull out the tube if they're paralyzed from the neck down?
It's a good question. Okay, their right hand works. You know what I'm saying? Like that kind of a case where even then, so even if they couldn't pull the tube out and they're suffering and they're going like this with their head back and forth and they move their head and they want to get it out, they can't. It's that level of suffering that I'm trying to get across. So I mean, you're right. When I say that, it's true what you're saying. Maybe that wouldn't be possible, but if it was possible, that's the kind of severe case I'm talking about. Not just someone who says, I'm not well, I'm dying, I've got a terminal illness, I'm checking out, I've had enough. But who are we to decide? Maybe the person who is saying that and saying, I've had enough, I can't take any more suffering, I don't want to suffer like this anymore, I'm not going to get better. They're not like I am sitting here talking to you. They're in a hospital bed, they might be having difficulty breathing, they might be full of anxiety, they might be clinically severely depressed. all of those things count, every element. So, you know, what Rabbi Fink said in the class, I'll share this with you. He always goes right back to the Torah because he wants us to know that everything has a source. It's not just the poskim, but we have to go back to the Torah, the Talmud, to Rambam. What do they say before we get into what modern poskim say, what the modern medical ethical rabbis say? And he says that in Parshat Mishpatim, and we talked about this at the very, very beginning at the last summer, but it's a refresher for us, is that they brought forward this case of two men fighting. Do you remember that? We talked about two men that were fighting, and one hits the other one and injures the other one. The other one becomes hurt, and the bad guy who injured his neighbor now has to pay. The court decided that he has to pay a compensation. He has to pay the other person because he hurt him. The guy, he misses work, etc., and he's suffering and he can't walk properly now because he got hit. So among the things that you have to pay, besides medical costs for the victim, the commentaries on the Torah ask a simple question. The commentaries in the Torah ask this: why did the Torah teach us that what the Gemara is saying is, since the Torah teaches us that this case, it implies that medical treatment is permitted? Like if the Torah is mentioning a case where the person hit somebody and hurt them, and now you have to pay compensation, well, we're implying that medical treatment is permitted. You're allowed to give medical treatment because maybe there were some poskim who believe, by the way, you don't give medical treatment. Hakol min hashamayim. Let God provide the intervention. If God wants the person healed, then God will heal the person. Rofei cholim, we say it in the Shemona Esrei, we say it everywhere. You know, if someone's sick, I don't need to protect myself. I'll let God protect me. Well, who made the doctors? God made the doctors. I want the doctors that God made to help me. I'm not interested in just relying only on God's busy. God's got a lot of people to worry about, not just me. God might say, I forgot about Marshall Loomer over there, but the doctors maybe didn't forget about me. God made the doctors. I'll take the help from the doctors that God made because I want all the help I can get. So the Torah tells us that this perpetrator, the person that hit the other guy, he has to pay expenses and medical costs. And this is what it says. It says, do not stand by while your neighbor is dying. All right. But it doesn't say that you're required to risk your own life. So if someone's shooting at someone in the street and you're in that bad neighborhood and you can help that person by opening up your door and allowing him into your house, okay, that's fine. But are you going to run out onto the street in front of the guy waving the gun and get shot yourself? That you're not required. Well, you can, but you're not required. You're not required by Torah law to do that. But you can choose to risk your own life if you want to. Nobody can say you're not allowed to do that. So the understanding of this whole concept of medical intervention in the first place is whether or not the easiest, simplest drug or the easiest, simple dental procedure or the easiest, simple alternative medicine procedure is going to prolong the suffering. Is it going to prolong the suffering, or is it going to help the patient? See, if you go to the dentist and he's got a drill and he's drilling your tooth because he has to take out the old filling and put in a new filling. It's a simple procedure today. We all go through that. Everybody has that problem or issue. Did you ever think of this? It's a bad day for the dentist and his hand slips with the drill. You could have great injury, right? Even the simplest procedure can cause great injury. Something that we always hear about, oh, it was a gallbladder surgery. It's routine. They do it every day. And then you hear, oh, this particular case wasn't so routine. that person was the 1 in 2 million that didn't have the muzzle that it should work out well. Somebody has that bad luck that for their procedure, in their particular case, it didn't work. It happens all the time. It's orthopedic surgery. You go in for a simple orthopedic procedure and, well, it's not simple. It could be a back surgery. And you get told 87% of the time this works. I don't know. What would you gamble on? You have to do it. So you do it because you can't walk unless you do it. But what if you're not part of the 87%? So it turns out that if you're prolonging a patient who is dying, if you're prolonging their life, you're not allowed to do it. Okay, so we're halfway there. But if they started a course of treatment and it turns out that all that particular treatment is doing is prolonging their suffering, just making them last longer, but it's not getting them better, what would be a case of that? And this is a controversial case among the poskim. The ventilator. The only reason that person is alive is because they're on a ventilator. Some people would say gently, softly, carefully, remove the ventilator, but don't do what you're not allowed to do. What are you not allowed to do? You're not allowed to move the patient, remember? You're not allowed to wheel them down. You're not allowed to move. You can't. Where does this come from, the Gemara? Do you remember the Gemara? We talked about something. They brought the case. They believed that if somebody was really, really sick, to take their mind off that sickness, they'd put a lump of salt on their tongue. And the lump of salt would cause an irritation, and the person would concentrate on that irritation. I'm talking back in the 12th century, and that would 11th century, and that salt would irritate them, and they would forget about their pains and their suffering and their illness because the lump of salt would make them concentrate on that. So the rabbis back then said, Rambam, Maimonides said, you're not allowed to go in and pluck that salt off it once the person's labeled a goses. If the person is dying, you can't go in and pluck that salt off. If you pluck the salt off, you're killing the patient. The person will die. You've caused the person to die by plucking the salt off. You imagine? It's an interesting case because it's like the person we talked about that they were dying, and the daughter said to the wood chopper, there's a guy outside, he's chopping wood, and it's rhythmically. Remember we talked about, yeah, you see you're nodding. And he said, do me a favor. She said, my dad, he's listening to the chopping rhythmically of the wood. Just stop chopping wood for a couple of hours, for a little while, and my dad will die in peace. He's ready to die. He's not moving his father. He's just taking away what is causing him not to die. He's removing the wood chopper who's chopping the wood. The person can't stop concentrating on that verkakta wood chopper who's chopping. The expression hakmira chainik. The person's banging a tea kettle out there, and you can't stop hearing them banging a tea kettle. If they would stop banging the tea kettle, I would die in peace. It's like the joke about the guy that says, my father used to do that. He used to say to me, I'd say, my dad, my right foot hurts. He'd say, come here, I'll stomp on your left foot, and then you'll forget about your right foot. It's a Jewish thing, right? But you can't move the person, but you're allowed to remove what is keeping them alive. So you could remove the ventilator. Would everyone agree with this? No. But I think that many of the mainstream poskim do, including the Tzitz Eliezer. We spoke about him last time. I said Rabbi Eliezer Yehuda of Oldenburg. When you talk of medical ethics, you have to bring his name in because he was the giant at Shaare Zedek Hospital in terms of medical ethics. all kinds of cases, not just assisted dying, but also in cases of abortion, in cases of every single medical ethics case that there probably came up, clinics that were certified as being halachic clinics for in vitro fertilization, because we were concerned. Remember, we learned about that. We said, yeah, it has to be a halachic clinic. Otherwise, maybe the person gave sperm everywhere. And now the girl who was born to a mother here married the boy who was born to a different family in Guelph, Ontario, met the Hamiltonian, and then they found out later on that the sperm donor was the father. Now the brother married the sister, So you need to have halachic clinics, because as Jews, we have laws and rules that we have to follow. But Rambam, Maimonides, whenever I used to hear the word, someone would be teaching and they'd say, Rambam said, I'd fall asleep. That was the first thing. If you want me to go to sleep, just say Rambam said, and I'd fall asleep. Because when we're learning Torah and we're learning what Rambam says in the Torah, I'm not suggesting it's boring at all. I'm suggesting that the opposite is true. He was a philosopher. He was a astronomer. He was a doctor. He had it all. He was a brilliant genius. And when he suggests something related to the early thoughts of medical ethics, he had something, there's a lot to rely on there. And what he says is, in order for a medicine to be effective, the medicine has to do something to the body, otherwise it's considered useless. So when you give a medicine, it does something to open up a door of risk, right? It opens up a door of risk. So think about modern times today. You have a headache, you take an Advil, and it helps. So the next day you take another Advil, and the next day you take another Advil, and you go, I like these Advil. I got a boss, he's driving me crazy. I'm getting a headache every day. I'll keep taking Advil. There's a risk. I'm not sure which does which, but acetaminophen or ibuprofen can cause damage to the kidneys and the liver, right? So maybe you already have a liver condition that you didn't know about, and now you're taking too much of this particular simple drug that's over the counter that you just buy, and you take it, and you find out, oh boy, now I've got a real problem. I've got liver damage. Rambam doesn't say that about the liver damage, but he's saying that in order for a medicine to be effective, it has to do something. A medicine opens up a door for risk. And then let's take a look modern. Morphine. So if we're talking about someone who is in that position of contemplating assisted dying, then that person may have already been on morphine. They might be already at that level of pain where they need it. So what does it do? Morphine relieves pain. On the other hand, it also suppresses your respiration. That's the balance. That's why they have to bring in the experts on that. When you're in the hospital, all of a sudden there's another person added to the team of doctors, because they have to watch the oxygen level in your blood, because if your oxygen falls too low because of the suppression caused by the morphine, then they have to reduce the dose of the morphine. They got to give you the right balance, just enough to make you spaced out enough so that you shouldn't feel the pain, but not too much that they are causing you to die. They're not supposed to tip the scale. A doctor can get in big trouble for giving you what is considered an overdose of morphine. That's not the way we're supposed to practice medicine. So a terminal patient at that stage is already extremely fragile. We can say that, right? They're a fragile person. So they're about to die, and suppressing this patient's respiration would be considered to be enough in, use the word, killing the patient. If you're overdosing them in morphine, aren't you killing that patient if you're giving them too much knowingly? Knowingly, I'm saying. I mean, even unknowingly, you could say, what do you mean you didn't know? You're supposed to know. You're the expert. Don't tell me you didn't know. So every single medicine, and Bernie would even say every single plant derivative of every single medicine is, could have a death rate associated with them. The simplest medicine, I mean, I get the vaccines for COVID. I keep up to date with my vaccines because I don't want to get sick and not have protection armor to help myself. Some people don't believe in them. I don't judge people that don't. I say, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm the dumb one. I have no idea. I just know that I'm following what the science is telling me to do. So I'm doing it, but maybe there's a risk. We've heard cases of people that have had vaccines, and it's another topic, but they've had effects on their heart. They've had TIAs, minor strokes, heart attacks. So there's an association of death and dying with every single medicine, whether it's researched through a clinical trial or not. Before that drug comes to market and you go through all of those trials and you read the label of the drugs that you say, and they go, it may cause nausea, it may cause vomiting, it may cause sleeplessness, it may cause you to sleep too much, it may cause fungus on your toenails. I don't know. But then it might say, they might find out things that it was supposed to cause that they didn't even know it was going to cause. Viagra was a medicine that was supposed to help your blood pressure, and it turned out that it did other things that they found out about. So, but the point is that if the kavanah, the intent, the intention is of the doctors when they're giving you that medicine, that they're giving it to you because they're experts, they're doctors, they're giving it to you to benefit you, to help you, to get better possibly, it's allowed. Because even though there's a risk that that medicine might kill you, you're still allowed to give it, because we're hoping that, how many times in the last 3 years have you heard, the benefit outweighs the risk? I've heard that a lot, and I go, all right, I'm trusting them, I don't like things injected into my body, but I'm trusting the experts, the scientists, and the doctors, and the medical profession, that if they're saying that the benefit outweighs the risk. And some people say, the benefit doesn't outweigh the risk to me. To me, maybe they say the benefit doesn't outweigh the risk. I don't want that kind of treatment. I want to die. I'm sick, not me, but somebody, God forbid, I won't even say that, they have a disease that you know about that is so bad in a case that their whole body is seizing up, their organs, they can't even get a breath, they can't breathe, they can't do anything. And they don't want to suffer like that anymore. And they make a decision. Who am I to judge them? Who am I to say, that you're not allowed to? That the rabbis will say that you're not allowed to kill a patient. But if somebody's already a gosses and they're already dying, maybe there's a way to find a balance and a leniency to allow it. I love, there's a book, a new set of books that just came out of the Aruch HaShulchan. I bought the first one. I'm becoming a halacha nerd. I like all the new books. I enjoy reading them. I was very excited when I went into Rabbi Shaim's office on Shabbos. I go in there sometimes during the Torah reading just to see what there is to read. And I saw on his bookshelf, he's still buying books, it's unbelievable. And there's a new book on his bookshelves that I spotted right away in a yellow cover. And I happen to have just bought it at the same time. And it's about, written by Rabbi David Brofsky, who was my first year teacher from Midrash at Lindenbaum. And he wrote a book on Moedim and all the festivals. It's so in depth. It's about this. It's crazy. But I bought the new copy of an English version. I highly recommend it for you, because you can read it and you can understand it. The Hebrew and the English is there now. It's the Aruch HaShulchan. All the volumes are not out yet. Only one volume came out. So the Aruch HaShulchan, he lived in the 20th century, so it's not that far off. and his books weren't that popular. Michael Epstein. And Michael Epstein, known as the Aruch HaShulchan, when he wrote these books, they didn't take off in the yeshiva world so much. And his daughter, Bryna, after he died, said, it's a shame. My dad's works are incredible. They have to be out there in the yeshivas. People can learn from them. And I found what happened was nobody wanted to buy them. And you know why? Because it had her name on the book that she was publishing it on for her father. Put a woman's name on it in the yeshiva world, and they don't want anything to do with it, which I think is shameful, by the way. But later on, in the later volumes, her name was removed, even though she's the one that raised all the money to publish it and to get them out there. Kol hakavod for her. They took her name out. Now they're being sold in all the yeshivas. Everybody's got the Aruch HaShulchan. So Baruch Hashem, his books are out there. But he says that in the beginning of the Masachet Smachot, in the beginning, where this material comes from the post-Talmudic period, it was never put in until the very end of the Gemara. So when the books were completely different, like ended, and they were almost finishing up and wrapping up the Gemara as we know it, the Talmud, they added in a Masechet called Smachot. It says in there, someone who is about to die has the status of being 100% alive. I find that to be an incredible sentence. Someone who is about to die has the status of being 100% alive as far as every halacha is concerned, and you're not allowed to do anything to hasten the patient's death. And this is what the Mishnah says. Anyone who moves any part of the patient's body while they're dying is considered to be shedding blood. You're a murderer, he's saying, if you do something to hasten the death of someone. Even if we see that the patient is suffering greatly at the end stage of life and see that the death would be preferable, it'd be preferable than the life of the patient, we're still not allowed to actively do anything that will hasten death. And the Aruch HaShulchan says, you don't have to agree with it, by the way, I'm just telling you what he says. He says, the whole universe, this is, by the way, Ruth is going to Israel on January 17th. If Ruth asked her daughters, this is exactly what they would say. The whole universe belongs to the Kadosh Baruch Hu. But I believe that too. So if the universe belongs to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, then this is what God wants. God does not want to kill anyone. And even if someone wants to die, we're not allowed to kill anyone. And even if they're suffering greatly, that is why we can't prepare anything for the funeral. It's upsetting to me when people call me up and they go, my mother's going to die, they say, in a couple of weeks. So we're going to go meet with Benjamins today. And I'm going, well, you don't have to meet with them today. You can meet with them after she dies. You don't have to do that. No, we want to prepare. In fact, we're going to order the food from the caterer. We'll figure out what they're going to have for the shiva. Like it's the wife the joke about the wife, she's baking the cookies. You don't know it, Ava? She's baking cookies upstairs. It smells good. And the dying husband's downstairs and he says, oh, what's that beautiful smell? It's delicious. What is it? She says, chocolate chip cookies. He says, can I please have one? She says, no, they're for the shiva. It's an awful joke. Okay. You have to have a sense of humor sometimes. If we don't laugh, Anyway, the point is that I made a joke before and I said, you don't wheel the casket into the room to discuss with the rest of the family. In other words, you think this is appropriate? Should we have this one? Is this a good one? This will be comfy. You don't do it. Many moons ago, I was a salesman and I was working in Sears in a clearance store. And in the downstairs in the basement, they had men's suits. And the Scottish couple came in and she said to me, can you please tell me where the men's suits are? I said, oh, they're downstairs in the right-hand side when you go down the escalator. Well, thank you. We're going to pick out his laying out suit. And the man is there because they bury them in suits, right? They get him all dressed up and they put him nice. So the man is going with his wife downstairs to pick out his suit that he's going to be wearing in the coffin. And I found that to be, because being brought up Jewish, I never heard of such a thing in my life. I was in my 20s at the time. And I said, I never heard of such a thing, So we're not allowed to prepare. Jewish people are not allowed to prepare anything for the funeral, whether it's choosing the casket, whether it's choosing the tachrichim, the white shroud. You can't do anything until the patient is dead. Bottom line. The bottom line is that our sources that we've learned about since last summer and getting back to it are emphasizing, they're saying very, very strongly that there's a prohibition, okay? There's a prohibition of taking any active measures that will hasten death. The other side of the story, which is refraining from any activity which is going to prolong suffering, isn't mentioned in earlier sources. So that was then. But what about today? What about today? What about, from the time of the end of the 20th century, what do they have to say? So another great rabbi who we've talked about a lot is Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. I've mentioned them all the time. I think it would have been fascinating to meet. I mean, you want to meet them all, but they're and hear them all. What Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, they named a town after him. I've told you many times, called Ramat Shlomo. He lived in Yerushalayim. In his first volume, I think it's in the Minchat Shlomo, or in the yeshiva world, the Minchas Shlomo. In the Minchas Shlomo, it says in his first book that he edited himself for publication. So the reason I'm saying that is because later on, after he died, his family published much of his works. And so sometimes there's some questions about some of those works. Well, did he really mean that? Or did his sons really mean that? That's what happens when you have posthumous publications. But in his first publication, he edited all of this himself. And then after he died, there were a lot of other volumes that were published by his family. But he gives that case of that sick girl who was suffering and lying there and unable to help herself and would need a lot of help. And here's what he says about that case. He says, it seems in my humble opinion, here we go again, Bernie. It seems again, in my humble opinion, if the proposed surgery is undertaken, the best we can expect will be a lifelong life of paralysis. And if the surgery is successful and saves the girl's life, she's going to be paralyzed for the rest of her life. So in addition, the surgeons can't guarantee that the surgery will save her life. And in a case like this, it's better to sit back and do nothing, not to operate. But if they don't operate, she's going to die. And he's saying, Jewish law doesn't say you have to operate in the case like this. So he says, instead of depending upon God's mercy, don't take that route. Don't let the surgeons perform a task that is not going to really help her. So what he's saying is, if the best scenario is that all she's going to be left long is with a lifelong life of sickness and paralysis, then it's better to just let the patient die. They said if she doesn't have surgery, she's going to die. So Rav Shlomo is explaining clearly that it's not fair to leave a person in that state if we perform surgery. And the amount of suffering in the life of the paralyzed person, and not only the paralyzed person, but in the family's situation, it wouldn't be fair. So what happens is, it concludes by Rav Shlomo saying that a lot of people are in this position. It's not just one here, one there. And a lot of people have great difficulties in making decisions for a terminal patient in a case like this. It's not easy, it's very hard. And I never step in and say, you can't do that. I mean, first of all, I have no right to say anything. But if somebody asks my opinion, I explain Jewish law. As of recent, I've done it. And I'll say, if you really want to know, you have to see a posek. But this is what my understanding is. My understanding is that you're not allowed to do anything to hasten death, but you can remove things that are prolonging life in the case of suffering. Very simple. So if you are going to remove a defibrillator, because the defibrillator is keeping the dying cancer patient alive, and they're going to die quicker by you removing it, that's okay, because you don't need to do things to prolong their life. But what seems reasonable is if the patient is in great suffering, even if it's emotional suffering, forget physical suffering. Let's talk about the emotional aspect of suffering, because remember we said in the case of abortion that a rodef al nefesh, someone who was pursuing the woman that had the Tay-Sachs baby, was going to have another one, and she was emotionally suffering, and they said, why do we want to put her through that? She doesn't want to have the baby. She doesn't want to be worried, sick, and commit suicide to herself and be that depressed for the rest of her life because she's worried about having another. She doesn't want, she already had one. She already lost one like that. She's not interested. That's serious. We have to consider that kind of emotional suffering. That's a rodef al nefesh. I like bringing that in. The rabbis don't. They don't tie those together in the sources. I do, because I look at it as help. I'm not suggesting, by the way, that you sign up for assisted dying. I never said that, and I'll never say it. What I'm saying is that if I were to need it myself, and I was in that position where I was suffering that greatly, where I just wanted to die, and I don't want to suffer one more day, I can't fault somebody for making that decision if they're suffering emotionally, because I don't see the difference. I'm talking just me personally between that kind of rodef al nefesh and the other kind of rodef. I think one is similar to the other. If somebody is being pursued and haunted by the misery, knowing that they are going to die and suffer more and more and more each day, it's going to get worse. Never better. There is never a chance it's going to get better. It's only going to get worse until they're choking. Then maybe they make a decision before that stage to say, this is the time to end my life. So if a patient is in great suffering, what do? Okay, you might give food and oxygen. I went to visit someone recently and they were dying, and I brought food and they were happy to taste the food and eat a little bit. So we're not trying to say, I'm not giving you any food. In fact, take away the air too. What do we need to, we don't do that. But if the patient says, don't give me any more medicine, don't give me any more treatment, don't prolong my suffering, then I think that, in that moment of someone's life, we have to look at it as, for that person, as Jews, we believe that there is an olam haba. There's a next world. This isn't it. I'm a great believer in energy. My studies have taught me that energy doesn't die. It continues in some other way. And maybe we have to trust in God and say that if we allow this person to die the way they want to on their terms, then perhaps that was the best thing to do, because that person is a God-fearing person. We're talking about someone who believes in God, follows mitzvot, comes to shul, does everything that they're supposed to do, and then they've had enough at the end. That person is going to earn a place in the olam haba the same as anyone else. So we're not saying, like another religion might say, you're going to hell if you take that road or that road. That's not the idea. That's not the route. That's not what you have to be afraid of. What we're saying, because that's what goes in people's minds. Oh, if I do that, God's going to punish me forever. What do you mean forever? No, we have to look at it and say, here's a person who was a regular, ordinary, good, decent, human, God-fearing person, and they're suffering. And at the end, they don't want any more medicine. They don't want any help. They just want to die. Take me off the ventilator. Let me die. I think that that's fair. Who am I to think it's fair? No one. But maybe you might agree and think that that's fair too. But when it comes to administering, like when you take the dog or the cat in when they're suffering, and I give the dog a needle, and the dog goes to sleep and doesn't wake up and dies, are we allowed to do that halachically? No. But am I allowed to tell somebody that they're not allowed to do it because they feel it's the right thing for them to do? No. And there's one other thing that the rabbis don't tell us, which I'm going to suggest, only because I think it's important to discuss it, because you'll say it if I don't say it. And that is, if someone is about to die and they're going to die, what happens when they die? There's a separation between the body and the soul. If you accidentally lean against a wall and you flip the light on Shabbos, right? You flip a light on. Are you in violation? No, because at most it was a rabbinic thing. It wasn't a Torah violation because there was no intent. There was no what we call lechatchila. You weren't premeditated. You weren't thinking, I'm going to go and lean on the wall to turn on the light. Although even some rabbis say that's okay, because it's a shinui. It's a different way of doing it. You want the light on because you're going to be sitting in the dark and there's nobody around to ask. There's no other person to ask to do it for me. So I got to find a way. I don't have a timer. I need a light on. I'm going to trip. I'm going to fall. I'm going to hurt myself. I'll break a hip. I need a light on. So they say, use your elbow, do a shinui, do something different. Like a doctor would write a prescription with his left hand on Shabbos, perhaps. Just something different, sign it differently. So write the prescription with your right hand, just sign your name with the left. You put a shinui, something different. That's why when we shovel at a cemetery, we use the back of the shovel as a shinui, something different, a different sign. So isn't it the same thing in a sense when we say someone is going to die? Let them die on their terms the way they want to die. They were a good person. It's already happened. The person made the decision. We don't like the decision, but that person made the decision. Too bad for us. Now they've done it. Now what? Where else did this come into play? This b'diavad, it already happened. B'diavad was the word we used. In transgender surgery, some of the modern Orthodox poskim said, if somebody goes through a surgery, I'm not talking about transitioning from a female to a male. I'm talking about transitioning from a male to a female. And they perform the act of serus. Halachically, they've broken the law, the Torah law of castration. We're not allowed to castrate an animal, and we're not allowed to castrate a person. But it says, the rabbis say, once it's already done, now it's b'diavad. Now we have to recognize the person as what they are. They've done it. It's too late. That's already done. I think it's similar in this case. If somebody is emotionally suffering that much, where they've made a decision that that's what it was because that's what it needs to be, then guess what? It's already done. What happens after it's already done? The soul separates from the body. God takes that soul back. God gives life. We say, Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach, yehi shem Adonai mavorach. God gives us life, breathes life into us, and God takes it back. And I like that expression. I used to think it was such an awful thing to say. But now when I explain it as something different, which is God takes away life, I don't like that. It doesn't say that. It says, Adonai lakach, he took back. He didn't take away. He took away. You know why we say he takes away? Because the Westerns that we used to watch, all the cowboy Westerns, the guy he'd measure the body, and for the casket, the undertaker would come and he'd go, and then the priest would stand there and he'd go, the Lord gives and the Lord taketh away. Well, taketh away means he took away from you. You lose your loved ones. I lose my loved ones. We lose the ones that we love. But that's not the real interpretation. It's not that he is taking away, because we're supposed to believe that God only does good. Well, that's a whole nother topic. I don't know if God only does good. I don't know. Maybe God is having a nap right now, and we have to wake him up a little bit. We have to pray harder to wake him up so that we don't have all the tragedies in the world. But maybe we have to accept the fact that we are a people that are supposed to live by mitzvot and commandments. And sometimes commandments are broken. And when they're broken b'di'evid, and it's already past that stage, the castration has been performed, it's already done. Then now what you have is you don't have, they say, a castrated male anymore, because he identifies as a female. So she, who identifies that way now, should be treated with respect and dignity as a human being, as a she. It's now a b'di'evid. You didn't intentionally do something. Your intent would not be, I want to die, because you don't. You want to live, but you want to live in the world where you're healthy and you can, and do we call that living? Lying there suffering in pain and horrible discomfort in a hospital bed where you're choking? Is that living? And that only can be determined by one person, and that's you. And I think that that's where we should end it. I have a lot more, but I don't want to go on about that anymore, because I think it's not necessary. I think we have to look at it and say, we have to do what's good for us. So what I want to do for the last week, next week on this topic, and finish it off, is finish by just rehashing a little bit about who is allowed to be determined to be the goses. So John Gurderman wrote, I know of a goses, so it's a goses who is kept on life support in order for his son to come from abroad so they can see each other one last time. I do have a comment. If you want. If you've had enough of this, you can exit and come back next week. We're going to finish with what a goses is. And then after that, we're going to start into something new. I want to delve into alternative medicine. Reiki. Are we allowed to have it? Are we allowed to do it? All of those issues with alternative medicine, and just rehash a little bit, and then we're going to start a new topic, okay? But here's the thing. When it comes to someone who is being kept on support in order for the son to come abroad, so many years ago, Rabbi Shaim was on a trip in Israel, and he had to return back in the middle of the trip for a family situation. And he asked me, he phoned me here. It was like in the middle of the night. I need you to come down to Israel and take over the tour, the trip. And I said, where are you? He said, well, tomorrow we'll be in the Dead Sea. So I got a last minute flight. The next morning, I'm gone. I'm out going to Israel. And because it was a last minute, I couldn't pick my seat. I couldn't anything. I was placed right beside a hospital gurney being shipped to Israel. And there were 2 nurses on. Imagine what this would cost. They had to pay for 6 seats because they're taking up 6 seats that couldn't be sold. 2 nurses, full-time, or maybe one was a doctor, I have no idea, medical professionals to accompany and escort this person who was about to die. The man wanted to be buried in Eretz Yisroel, and he wanted to die in Eretz Yisroel. It wasn't good enough for him to be buried there. He wanted to die in Israel, in the land of Israel. They were only keeping him alive so he could die there. It was the worst trip for me in my entire life ever, because I don't want to be gross, but this is what the situation was. They had to suction him every half an hour, his lungs, because he was dying of congestive heart failure on top of everything else. And right beside my head, I'm talking here, and they're suctioning him, and my head is right beside him, and I can't move, I can't leave. There's no other seats for me. That was the seat I was given. So for an 11 hours of flight, I've got a dying man groaning and moaning and suffering, and I'm trying desperately to put myself in him and his family's place and not think of myself. But I was thinking of myself because I'm going, why did I have to get this seat? Why do I have to have this? Why do I have this? And so I didn't sleep 1 second. And I went to Israel and I went, anyway, that's the whole short of the story. Well, I guess the answer is we're honoring the person's wishes, right? By saying they want to be kept alive. It's the opposite, isn't it? It's this person wants everything possible to continue to live. They're allowed to decide that for themselves. It's the opposite of what we're talking about. When you are a goses, as that person was, and he's saying, I want everything possible. Give me it all. But I only want it as long enough. But you know what? In all fairness, the person isn't saying, give me everything possible forever, as long as you can. He didn't say that. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that as soon as he got to Israel, and as soon as they transferred him to wherever he was being transferred to, the hospital, whatever it was, everything was taken off. I'm pretty sure that would have been the case. They would have then no more suctioning, no more anything. And that allows the person to die. So we've all been in situations where we are watching our loved ones die, and we're thinking to ourselves, I want to do everything possible to help that person live longer. It's not the right decision to do that. I'll speak from personal experience and then we'll go. My father was dying and I went to the hospital and I told them to suction him the day before he died. And I told you the story, I think, before, and it was the wrong decision. I felt guilty for a long time because he looked at me like, why did you do that? I could kill you. He looked at me because he wanted to die. He was ready. And I did something to prolong his suffering and prolong his life, but I did it unknowingly. I didn't do it intentionally. I wasn't intentionally trying to prolong his life. I unintentionally did something that was the wrong decision. Had the doctor been in the room, the one that this woman, she would have told me for sure that's not the right thing to do. Leave him alone. But there was nobody there to guide me. So I put in the order. I asked for it and they did it. Maybe they should have advised me it's not the right thing to do, but nobody said that. So they did it. So, okay. The point is that it's a very, very tricky situation. We're not supposed to try to hasten death, but we're also not inside that person's body and suffering their emotional distress. So the correct thing to do is, I say, follow the halacha as much as possible. Don't do things to hasten death. When you get into a situation where the suffering is so great and the emotional suffering is that bad, you can look at that as a rodef al nefesh and then make your decision accordingly. So next week, let's finish off with the actual topic of what a goses is, what it is, and then we'll understand what everything we learned about how it applies and when it applies. And then we're going to actually start with the new topic, which I have to just determine what that's going to be. I thought of something that I'd like to go back to a little bit, and that's about how to be your own mashgiach in today's times, meaning your own mashgiach in your own home. Because, you know, I was thinking recently about other countries and other places where they don't have what we have. We have symbols on everything. So if we really want to be, you know, what I want to call dumb it down, it's easy here. It doesn't have an MK or a K or a U on it. You don't buy it, right? But is that always true? And how do you be your own mashgiach? Because I was in London, England. Very few products have a hechsher on it now, because Sainsbury's, which is the main grocery store, is owned by the royal family of Qatar, and they don't like Jews, and they don't bring in Israeli products. They boycott Israeli products. So there's very few Israeli products there. So depending where you're going in the world, there's different situations. And what can you trust and what can you rely on and what can you not rely on? So I want to do that for a little bit. If you're interested, if you're not, then let's do something else. We'll go back and do something different. But I just thought it might be interesting. We'll call it be your own mashgiach. So it's a different level of kashrut. Okay. All right, everyone, let's stay well and healthy, and we'll see you next Wednesday.
Thank you, Marshall.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Always thank you.
Thank you, Marshall.
Marshall.
Thank you, everyone, for coming and participating. I really appreciate it. It wouldn't be a class without you. So I'm grateful to you. Okay.
Marshall, I had the same situation with my dad that you did. I also asked for suctioning because I think the feeling of drowning when you know you're going to be dying soon is horrible.
I felt the same way because I'm afraid of drowning. You know what I mean? I don't even like the water. So I was looking at him and I felt that I heard it, and there was nobody to guide me. So I made that decision. But Adele, he looked like he was sleeping when I was offering it, but truly he was more with it than I thought. And he woke up and his eyes looked at me with that look that only a father can look at a son or a daughter with. You know, that look they give you, like, what did you do? And I just felt so bad and guilty about it. But we all go through those kinds of things. Listen, I'm not holding that guilt. I just feel that, you know, when we talk about assisted dying, we have to say that there is the halacha, and then there's the element of this particular case, which might be an unusual case. And you could say, no, I don't care. We're not let them suffer. As long as they have to suffer, it's up to God. You can do that. I don't know if that's the right thing. I'm not so sure. If somebody has, I'll give you an example, ALS, their lungs are shutting down, they can't breathe, they're suffering, they're miserable, they're laboring for every single breath. Yes, they will eventually die if we don't do anything to intervene 100%. But why do we want to make that person do that for an extra 24, 48, 30, whatever the amount of hours are longer, when it's possible for them to be not suffering? That's all, you know. So
There's been cases. There's cases like a long time ago, years ago, where they kept it was a Hasidic family, and I don't know, it was.
I remember the case, Marion. You're 100% right, and I remember it very, very well.
It's horrible.
It's horrible. It's horrible, and that's where, you know, there's always the right wing, ultra right side of things that will follow everything to a T, and they don't even care. Even Rav Asher Weiss, who the Minchas Asher, who's a modern posek of our time now, who Asher Weiss would be so against doing anything, you know, but you can choose to follow that. I mean, the Hasidim are going to look and see what does Rav Asher Weiss say, and then they're not going to look and see what the Minchas Shlomo says. Oh, the Minchas Shlomo, he was already too modern. His beard was only 78 inches long instead of 82 inches long. I need an 82-inch long beard. What I'm saying is that you can be from, and you can have common sense, and most do. But there are some that will take an exception and want to do what they feel to be the right thing for themselves and their family. And I wouldn't blame
Only
somebody.
they feel it's God's will.